It's hard to ignore the mood of the moment right now. I mean, public life feels tense. Conversations break down almost immediately. Positions harder, voices get louder, and instead of working through disagreements, we often end up talking past one another. It's easy to see this as a political problem, and in this day and age, it certainly is part of it. But in a deeper sense, it's a cultural issue. Because the ability to listen, really listen, is the foundation of any society that expects people with different ideas, backgrounds, and perspectives to live together. And that raises an interesting question. What does it actually look like when people do that well? For more than a century, there's been a place where that challenge plays out in real time, night after night. And it's not, it is certainly not in politics, but it is in jazz. In a jazz group, every musician has a voice. We're talking about collective improvisation. Everyone has that freedom. But the freedom only works if the players listen closely to each other and respond in the moment. No script, no predetermined outcome. Just individuals finding a way to build something together. When it works, the result is remarkable. When it doesn't, the music falls apart. It's kind of a beautiful thing that we could learn a lot from. And this week, there are 3 stories in jazz that seem to speak directly to that idea. First, Jazz at Lincoln Center has launched a new initiative called Jazzcall For Freedom, built around the belief that the values embedded in jazz, listening, dialogue, improvisation, still have something to say about how people live together, and possibly even place a big comment on our current political situation. Then we'll head to Washington, D.C., where the lineup for the 2026 DC JazzFest has just been announced. It's a major celebration of the music happening in the nation's capital at a time when the country itself is deeply divided. And finally, we'll look at 3 upcoming album releases from Adam O'Farrell, Mark Turner, and Miroslav Vitouš, musicians from 3 different generations, continuing the creative conversation that keeps this music alive. Because if jazz teaches us anything, it might be this: freedom only works when people are willing to listen. That idea that jazz might have something to teach us about how people live together isn't just philosophical. Right now, one of the most prominent jazz institutions in the world is making that argument directly. At Jazz at Lincoln Center, a new initiative called Jazzcall For Freedom is built around the belief that the way jazz musicians interact, improvising, listening, responding, negotiating space, offers a powerful model for how a democratic culture actually works. It's a striking idea, and the lessons embedded in the music might matter far beyond that idea, far beyond the bandstand, because in jazz, freedom isn't chaos. Freedom is responsibility. Freedom is listening, and freedom only works when everyone in the ensemble is willing to participate in that conversation. That's the philosophy behind Jazzcall For Freedom, and it's the first story we're looking at this week. So, as I've mentioned, this new initiative from Jazz at Lincoln Center has launched, and it's called Jazzcall For Freedom, Wynton Marsalis has announced this in a number of different places, ranging from social media of Jazz at Lincoln Center to news stories he's done, different YouTube interviews where he's talked about this, where the project frames jazz not just as music, but as a model for democratic culture and civic dialogue. The initiative positions jazz as a cultural response to political polarization and social fragmentation in the United States. That's pretty powerful, and I am really excited to hear this happening because I feel like we live in a troubled time politically. And if you look in the past, in the history of music, whenever there was political strife, music talked about it. There were musicians writing protest songs. There were musicians who spoke out for their rights. And in such a bizarre time as we're living in, I have not seen that happening as much. If you have and I'm missing it, throw it down in the comments because I'd love to find out more about it. But I'm really excited that not only a musician, but a major cultural institution is taking a stand like this. Now, let's look at the core idea right here. The central premise is that jazz represents democratic practice in action. According to the initiative, jazz demonstrates pluralism. It models individual freedom within collective responsibility. It allows different voices to coexist and collaborate. The organization argues that jazz can serve as a living civic language, capable of addressing division and sustaining democratic imagination. I mean, think about it. Think about it for a minute. We're living in a time where political parties are more divided than they have ever been. We're living in a time where authoritarianism might become a reality in the United States. We could learn a lot from jazz. We could learn a lot from that idea of collective responsibility. Collective improvisation isn't about everyone saying what's on their mind all at the same time. It's about interacting. It's about listening to each other and commenting on that, not talking over. That's beautiful. And I love this because I do think if our political leaders acted a little more like jazz musicians, we'd be doing a lot better. Now, the initiative, what it actually is it operates through performances and public participation. Artists perform under the Jazzcall For Freedom banner. These performances are released online through YouTube and social media platforms. The performances focus on music tied to themes of freedom, democracy, American identity, and social struggle. This is powerful because, like I was saying, there has been a lot of music that has come through jazz that speaks to these themes. So it's a great place to dig those up and to have modern musicians perform them and share that under this idea of Jazzcall For Freedom. Now, it's not just the musicians that Jazz at Lincoln Center pick, though. Musicians and fans can participate by posting performance videos and using the hashtag Jazzcall For Freedom, and then tagging Jazz at Lincoln Center to join the project and possibly share those videos that are part of the initiative. This effectively turns the initiative into a distributed cultural movement rather than a single concert series. Now, Jazz at Lincoln Center posted the first video in this series last week. It's a version of Contemplation from McCoy Tyner with saxophonist Chris Lewis and friends performing. It's interesting because they're doing this on shorts, not long-form videos. which might be good. You might argue that in the shorts format, maybe the music doesn't really have a chance to speak. And I might say that's true, because jazz isn't about fitting things into a 30-second, 1 minute format right there. Jazz is about taking the time you need to say what you need to say. But what I like about this is that I think that shorts more easily are shared. Shorts are more easily seen by people who might not follow a particular channel, are seen by people who might be interested in politics and not so interested in jazz. So this idea could spread. They're encouraging people not just to post any video, but a version of contemplation, so there's a theme for each week. Now, I like that because it's, beyond the democratic angle right here. It's also kind of a, you might say a challenge to musicians to every week be playing great tunes like Contemplation and recording them. That's pretty cool. I mean, that's some work to do every week, and it could really help a jazz musician stay on track and keep things going. Now, one thing I have noticed that I find a little disconcerting is I did some searches for the hashtag Jazzcall For Freedom. And I'm going to be honest, I do need to dig a little deeper, but I did some cursory searches, and I'm finding the hashtag being attached to a variety of different things. Everything from high school students performing in a big band to individual musicians playing random songs, and not really tied to the idea that the Jazzcall For Freedom initiative is supposed to portray. And that's problematic in a sense. I think it's reflective of our social media culture and maybe the TikTokification of our attention spans. But this is an important thing. And the idea of putting that hashtag on just about any video, even if it's related to some sort of jazz thing, misses the point. To me, that is an attempt to garner the attention of Jazz at Lincoln Center. It's an attempt to maybe further your own personal reach through being shared by Jazz at Lincoln Center. But all those things, you might make arguments of musicians needing to promote themselves, their music, or whatever. But we're talking about something bigger than that. We're talking about the state of our democracy. And we want to treat that with the same sort of respect that we want our government to be treating us with. So I hope that as this moves into the future, musicians use this hashtag to bring attention to things that actually speak to this. Yes, maybe it is them doing the song that Jazz at Lincoln Center suggested, in this case, Contemplation. But maybe it's something that speaks to the message. I would love to see that happen. And if you are doing any of this, you're posting a video of Contemplation or something that you think has a serious message about democracy around the idea of Jazzcall For Freedom, put that hashtag in there, but tag me as well. I would love to save that. I would love to share that. And I would love to put some of that up here on the podcast. I think it would be really interesting to say. If you're doing it, put a message down in the comments and let me know about it, because again, this is important. Now, it's not just the initiative on social media connected to this. There is a major work connected to the initiative. And this is from an album called We the People that Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra has put out in the last couple weeks. This is a composition performed by the group. The project translates American visual art into a large-scale musical portrait of U.S. history. The work draws inspiration from artists including Romar Bearden, Thomas Cole, Stuart Davis, Grace Hardigan. The goal is to reflect America's cultural history through jazz composition. And I have to say that I've heard the album, and it's great. It is not only the stellar big band performance that we've come to expect from the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra, but it's very powerful, the cultural messages that it has embedded in the music. It's really worth a great listen. And I just wanted to mention that there's a piece here that might feel a little yucky. It might feel like, oh, Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra is releasing an album that's reflecting American culture. So if they do this big initiative, maybe that would bring more attention to the album. It might feel like a big promotional play in one sense, but I don't quite buy that, because I've heard Wynton speak on this, and he speaks very passionately about his beliefs around democracy and the way that music can change that. And I think this initiative is coming at a time where, one, it needs to be heard, but it's also a little perilous to put yourself out there like that. As I mentioned, we may be looking at a form of authoritarianism here in the United States via our current government. And people like that, authoritarianism governments, generally do not like artists, musicians, storytellers speaking out against them. And in a not 100% direct way, but pretty clearly, that's what this is doing. So I do feel like it's a little bit of a risk, and I really respect Jazz at Lincoln Center for doing this. And it's not uncommon. This is smart, because the initiative sits within a long tradition of jazz engaging directly with democracy and freedom. Look at albums like We Insist, the Freedom Now Suite by Max Roach and Oscar Brown Jr. If you have not heard that album, stop this podcast and put it on right now. It's powerful, it's soulful, it speaks to the politics of the time, and will really get you thinking even about the politics in this day and age. Listen to Blood on the Fields by Wynton Marsalis, another really powerful album that speaks to culture and politics. Listen to Charles Mingus Presents Charles Mingus, where Mingus and groups perform Fables of Faubus, a scorching political commentary on politics in that day and age. All of these works address themes of slavery, civil rights, social justice, and the meaning of freedom in America. So the fact that Jazz at Lincoln Center is doing this in this day and age is actually part of the tradition. And it's a bold thing that comes with risk. It comes with potential ramifications, but it's important. And it's a lineage that they are coming on. And it shouldn't surprise us, because Jazz at Lincoln Center has long emphasized the connection between jazz, history, and civic culture. The organization runs major education programs like Essentially Ellington to spread the connection of this music. It tours and teaches internationally and takes their mission into explicit civic engagement. That is important stuff. And if we look at the whole initiative, there are lots of big themes. The initiative argues that jazz itself demonstrates freedom, listening, negotiation, collaboration. So we're saying that improvisation becomes a model for democracy. Important stuff. And I think I've said enough times at this point, I cannot agree more. The other big idea that we've got here is, again, it's not a person, it's an institution. It's an institution with a big voice that people around the world hear. And a major institution positioning jazz as cultural heritage, civil discourse, national identity means something. People will hear the message. Whether they agree with it or not, they will hear it, and it's more than likely that they will think about it. That's powerful. And the last thing I really, really like about this is that this is music responding to the times. This is not music saying, oh, we have to do this because jazz musicians did this in the 50s. Or this is not jazz musicians saying, oh, we need to do this because we're going to connect to a wider audience. This is a group of jazz musicians mirroring the modern world. This is a response to contemporary politics that references polarization, cultural fragmentation, and threats to democratic norms. It's not just a normal night of jazz. It's a cultural statement. And I cannot say how much respect I have for that. And I just want to close up this segment by saying that I cannot say how pleased and proud I am to hear Wynton Marsalis talking about this. Wynton is a powerhouse figure. And for years, Wynton's phrase has been that jazz is America's classical music. He has driven the point home over and over and over again that jazz is tied into American culture, intimately tied into American culture, and you can't break the two apart. Now, let's think about where Wynton's at in his career. He is in his last year of artistic director at Jazz at Lincoln Center. He could easily bypass this. He could easily finish out his year and go on to the next thing that he has planned and still have his cultural attaché and all of his influence that walks away with it. But he decided not to do that. He decided to take a risk. He decided to say that democracy in America is important, and democracy is reflected in jazz. So let's have jazz say something about it. He did not have to do that. But, in a sense, if he didn't do that, that would be such a conflict with everything he has said for years, with everything that he has shaped about jazz. And I have to say, I didn't think about it before this was announced, but if he didn't do that, that would be a little bit of a disappointment, I do have to say. But Wynton stepped up, and my respect for Wynton, which was already pretty high, just rose up even higher. And I'm just very pleased to see this happening. I hope that you can join in on the Jazzcall for Freedom initiative, and you can listen to the album We the People, and you can join in on the conversation. If you got thoughts about that, put them down in the comments. And again, if you create videos using the hashtag Jazzcall for Freedom, tag me in them so I can share them and we can talk about it. Well, I have to say, powerful first story. And it's almost ironic that the next story isn't quite as powerful, but takes on additional weight because of the location of what we're talking about here. We're going to be talking about the DC JazzFest, who just announced their lineup for the 2026 festival. This is exciting because this is a major festival, and this is one of the first big announcements of the fall jazz season. So we're starting to see the festival season take shape. And that's always exciting, whether you're going to go to these major festivals or not. It does speak to what is happening in the jazz world now and what is valued in the wider culture. So that first wave of artists has been announced. The festival is going to take place September 2nd through 6th, 2026, all across Washington, D.C. It's going to be in multiple venues around the city, from large outdoor stages to smaller club settings. Now, we'll talk about Washington, D.C. in a minute, but let's talk about the artists who are going to be here, because I am really impressed with this lineup. It's a mix of jazz veterans, contemporary stars, and genre-crossing artists. Let's talk about the headliners. We've got Dee Dee Bridgewater, an amazing vocalist and NEA jazz master; Joshua Redman, a modern tenor sax heavyweight; Elling, a Grammy-winning jazz vocalist; Cory Henry and the Funk Apostles, gospel, funk, jazz, crossover music; Nate Smith, a drummer bridging jazz and groove music. This is particularly interesting because remember, a couple weeks ago, we talked about Nate Smith being named the new artistic director of the Newport Jazz Festival. So it'll be interesting to see what he brings to DC. They're also going to have Bill Frisell, legendary guitarist, composer, who just released a new album that's really great, by the way, worth checking out. Danilo Pérez, pianist and longtime Wayne Shorter collaborator. Etienne Charles's Creole Soul, a Caribbean jazz project from the trumpet player who is doing some amazing things. And Emmett Cohen, a kind of rising piano star in the modern jazz world. This is an interesting mix, and we've talked a little bit in the past few episodes about the importance of festivals recognizing jazz if they're going to be a jazz festival, and not just putting a bunch of pop stars in there to sell tickets, but actually seeing what's going on in jazz. And while this is not all super traditional jazz, I feel like this lineup is well connected to what's happening in modern jazz, and it's an interesting look on the modern jazz world. If I was anywhere close to DC, which I'm not, but if I was, I would be attending this festival. This is a powerful lineup, and it doesn't end there. The festival is also going to include several major historical tributes, including the recognition of the Randy Weston Centennial. Very cool stuff. Randy Weston, powerful musician that it's not recognized as much as some of the other legends in jazz. At least I feel like. And they're going to have a tribute by the African Rhythms Alumni Quartet. Really great seeing Randy Weston being recognized here. And then, of course, we're going to have John Coltrane and Miles Davis celebrations. We're hitting the centennial for both those musicians, and we're going to have performances from artists like Isaiah Collier. We're going to have tribute performances from Nassar Abadeh and Supernova. These are interesting choices. You could pick, musicians that maybe mirror the sound and feel of Train or Miles, but they didn't. They picked musicians who are modern, interesting, and most likely, I'm going to guess, influenced by those two musicians. That's going to be interesting. I would love to see that. And it's interesting to see this idea of legacy sets being tied to Jazz Anniversary. You could look at this as a blending of education and performance. You could look at this as a way to sell tickets, those big jazz names being on the marquee. You could also look at this as a respect to the tradition right there, that says, hey, these musicians made what's happening today. They paved the way. That's powerful. I actually really like this idea. I'd hate to see it becoming the dominant force in festivals because I think that would overshadow what's happening today, but that's not what's happening here. They've got a great lineup, and this is in addition to. So I'm really glad to see that. And then it doesn't stop there. We're also spotlighting the next generation. The festival's emphasizing emerging artists. We've got some rising players on the bill, including trumpeter Brandon Woody, DC bassist and bandleader Ben Williams, vocalist Ikep Nenkwale. We've got trumpeter Kenny Rittenhouse, and then we've got pianist Jose Andre. This is pretty cool because a lot of these musicians I'm not aware of. A couple of them I've heard the names but haven't listened to extensively, and just them being on the bill right now, I want to go listen to them, and I probably will, in all honesty, which is a great service to these musicians. And just imagine if I had no idea who these people were, but stumbled into their performance at the festival, and all of a sudden I'm a true fan. All of a sudden I'm talking about these artists. I'm spreading the word about these artists. That is the way that young musicians, or I should say rising musicians, get to be the powerhouses, the legends, the international artists. So I'm really excited to see the DC JazzFest doing that. But that's not all. There's more. This is a great festival. This is not a festival I've followed a whole lot, in all honesty, but hearing all of this, I'm excited. This is one of those festivals I'm going to track. You know, I'm always aware of the Newport, the SF Jazz Festival, San Jose Jazz Festival, Montreal, a bunch of them. This I'm adding to the list. I'm going to keep an eye on this one. Now we've got 2 artists in residence for 2026 at the DC Jazz Festival. The great Emmett Cohen, who is a wonderful musician who I really enjoy. I like to check out his YouTube videos, Emmett's Corner, where it's basically him jamming with some really great musicians. It's really worth checking out. The other is pianist Janelle Gill, who I'm honestly not as familiar with, but again, now that name is on the DC Jazz Festival list, I'm gonna go check them out. Their roles at the festival will include festival performances. They're going to be doing some education at the festival, and then community engagement activities throughout the year. Not quite sure what that looks like, but really great. I'm sure it's really amazing for the DC jazz community to have that in there. Really powerful stuff. This sounds like an amazing festival. This sounds like a massive festival too. This is one of the major U.S. jazz festivals. The event typically spreads across 20 or more venues across Washington, D.C. This isn't one night. This isn't one venue for a week. This is city takeover, which is what we need. That is the way that jazz works its way into community. That is the way that people truly connect with jazz. Not just people who can buy a really expensive ticket for a one-day festival. This is the community connecting. And that, to me, that says that jazz means something in DC. I didn't know that. So I'm going to have to dig deeper into that. Performances are going to be at outdoor waterfront venues like the Wharf, clubs. There's going to be community events, all sorts of stuff. Big thing. Now, let's talk for a minute, though. Super exciting. Before I get into the serious stuff, I do just want to say, as a jazz fan, I find that super exciting, and I wish I could be there. But let's talk about the politics, the historical moment, and the significance of this happening in Washington, D.C. Now, I just spent a minute talking about the Jazzcall For Freedom initiative and the way that jazz might show us a better path, possibly compared to the politics that are happening today. Well, this is a major jazz festival happening in the nation's capital. That, to me, that's two-sided. To me, that means, wow, maybe someone over there is listening. I'm going to be a little cynical for a minute. I'm going to say, I don't think anyone in the White House is listening. I don't think anyone had anything to do with this festival. I think this was put on through organizations like the Mellon Foundation, putting funding in, things like that. But maybe there's a sparkle of hope in there. And also that this is an opportunity. This is not just a regular festival. This is an opportunity for musicians at the festival to call out some of the things that are happening in our country today and use jazz as a vehicle to speak to the larger issues. Jazzcall for freedom. That's what we're talking about here. I would love to see artists take that to heart in the nation's capital. If people aren't listening, make it so they have to. That's powerful. And that's not an opportunity all jazz musicians have. These are musicians playing in the nation's capital. And if there's any time to do it, now is the time. Little Charlie Parker reference there. But it's very apt because 2026 marks the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. This is a big deal. It's a big deal for our country. This is going to be a big deal in Washington, D.C. You can guarantee that this is going to be everywhere on the streets. I know there's going to be big celebrations happening at the Capitol and beyond. This is the time to speak out. If we want another 250 years, we want our government to be learning from jazz. It's really something that we need to be thinking about. And I hate to go as far as to say that it's a responsibility of jazz musicians, because we all, I don't think everyone has to fight the good fight, but I think most people should. And in that case, I would frame this more as an opportunity that I hope some musicians at the festival take. Big stuff. It's a very powerful thing. I want to just wrap it up that, this is an amazing festival. We've got legacy artists. We've got young performers. We've got groove-based jazz. We've got genre hybrid acts. We've got artists in residence. We have, educational opportunities. We've got a city takeover here. This is a major festival. This is happening in the nation's capital. So there are ties to politics. There are ties to culture here that we need to pay attention to. Like I said before, I was not quite aware of the depth of the DC JazzFest before. I'm going to be keeping an eye on it. And I think that as musicians and as American citizens, we should all be watching this to see how musicians frame this, to see how musicians choose to or choose not to take the jazz call for freedom. I'd be very interested. If you've gone to the DC JazzFest and you know about it, put your thoughts down in the comments. Tell me what it's like. Tell me what's there. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about whether jazz musicians should speak their mind about government, politics, and culture at the festival. I'd love to hear that. In our last segment, we're going to talk not about politics. We're going to talk not about the responsibility of musicians or festivals. We're going to talk about some jazz. Imagine that, which is what we're all here for and what we love. We've got a few notable upcoming jazz releases that I wanted to highlight. These feature three very different voices in the music. We've got a rising avant-garde trumpeter, one of the defining tenor saxophonists of the modern era, and a legendary bassist returning with a large ensemble project. Some exciting things ahead, so let's dig into it. The first album that I want to talk about is Elephant by trumpet player Adam O'Farrell. This is going to be coming out closer to the end of the month, March 20th. It's an independent release put out by a label called Out of Your Head Records. They promote some really interesting music from Adam O'Farrell's album to the latest release by jazz cellist Tamika Reed, as well as lots of really great stuff. Interesting label that I wasn't quite aware of until I was doing some research for this album, but I am definitely going to check them out deeper because they're supporting some powerful music. Now, the album features O'Farrell's working quartet, which is O'Farrell on trumpet and electronics, Yvonne Rogers on piano and synthesizer, Walter Stinson on bass, and Russell Holzman on drums. This is a blend of contemporary chamber jazz writing, but that's a little too confined of a definition because we've got things like electronics and modern techniques. We have things like experimental improvisation. There's a lot of stuff in here. It's already getting some critical buzz. Critics say things like genre blurring, jazz quartet interplay combined with influences from minimalism and electronic music. I hear that and already I'm intrigued. But there's more because O'Farrell is widely seen as one of the leading composers of the New York creative jazz scene. And he has some serious cred. I won't dig too deep into it because this is certainly not the end of his story at all. But of course, he comes from a great legacy of musicians from Arturo O'Farrell and Chico O'Farrell, a long legacy of great music in that family. But that is not what defines O'Farrell. For me, what defines him is the work he has done over, I would say, for me at least, the past 5 to 10 years. His work as a leader, his work as part of Mary Halverson's group, his work as part of Hiromi's Sonic Wonder group. All of these drastically different things, but his voice has become distinctly unique on the trumpet. And I don't, honestly, I think of him and I think of all that work when it comes to it. And when I hear about a new album from Adam, I get really excited. Now, there's currently 4 tracks available to preview. 3 of them make up a suite called C Triptych. Each one has its own name: Along the Malecon, The Three of Us Floating, and Iris Murdoch. And there's also a song outside the suite called Herkimer Diamond. Now, I have to say, out of all the albums that I've been kind of previewing this year, this is the one that I might be excited for the most. I think that it walks a line between improvisational experimentation and composition that I think is really interesting. It's accessible, but it's also very rooted in tradition. When I was listening to this, and I don't say this to pigeonhole the music at all, but when I was listening to this, I was thinking about the first time I discovered Weather Report's music and how colorful it was to me, and how there were stories embedded in the music, and how it felt so modern and relevant to me, as opposed to some of the very traditional jazz that I encountered as a young person. I get that sense here. And the other thing, thinking back to when I first heard Weather Report, the thing that I knew right away, it was deep. It was very deep musically, artistically. There were a lot of artistic choices that went into this, and I feel that in O'Farrell's music too. I am really starting to enjoy his playing deeply. Like I said, he's got a deep connection to tradition, but he's not afraid to experiment. I like, in particular, his use of effects on the trumpet. We so often, associate effects with guitar, electric bass, keyboards. Those are the type of instruments that get all the effects usually. But O'Farrell has put those on his trumpet in a thoughtful and compelling way, really. It's almost as if the effects are part of the language that he's speaking. They're not just there for show, they're part of the dialect. And I really like that. It makes me forget that he's using effects. It makes me more think of that's just his voice. And I really like that. I find that very thought-provoking as a musician, and I really respect that. The other thing, now I mentioned how critics have called this genre blurring. And I'm going to be honest, I hate the idea that genre doesn't exist anymore. Not because people shouldn't play with genre, or not because people shouldn't experiment with different types of genre. I feel like sometimes that's just an excuse to me. For me, that's an excuse for people who don't want to put in the work and don't want to actually learn the tradition and language of jazz, and we just call it genre blurring, and then you're playing jazz even though it's not rooted to anything associated with jazz. But that's a whole nother episode. That's a whole nother video that I need to make one of these days. But I'll just finish that up by saying that that whole idea that genre blurring as an excuse for ignorance is not here at all. This album jumps fluidly between genres. And I'm not talking about one section's swing, one section's Latin, one section's hip hop. No. The phrases go through different influences of genre and culture and history. This is coming from a place of intelligence. This is coming from a musician who speaks all those languages fluently and can now blend them all together in a way that makes sense. Like I said, this might be the album that I am the most excited about right now, and I can't wait for March 20th so I can hear it. The next album that I want to talk about comes from tenor saxophonist Mark Turner, and this is an album called Pattern Master. This comes out on March 13th, and this is on ECM Records. Really great because, ECM has always had this reputation and this kind of slant of taking the musical differently. Maybe you might call it more of a European approach, definitely kind of the third stream influence, the use of classical ideals. And this album, I'm not quite sure that it fits into that ECM stereotype in a way, but it certainly has some powerful ideas in it. Now, it features Mark Turner on tenor saxophone, of course, Jason Palmer on trumpet, Joe Martin on bass, and Jonathan Pinson on drums. Now, there's lots of implications here. The title suggests Turner's longstanding interest in intricate melodic patterns, advanced harmonic structures, and spacious ensemble improvisations. Those would be fair assumptions to make, but that's not what this is about. And hearing Turner talk about this album, the pattern master, Mark Turner is a big science fiction fan. I have to admit, I am too. I love that. And so is one of Turner's longtime heroes, the great Wayne Shorter, who famously based so much on his love for science fiction. The pattern master is an idea from a science fiction novel that Turner read, and he sees this character of the pattern master as someone a lot like Wayne Shorter. So simultaneously, it's a kind of tribute to one of his heroes and a connection to some of this inspiration from science fiction. Really interesting stuff, and it becomes even more powerful because Mark Turner's a team player. He records quite a bit with a lot of different people, but he honestly releases albums infrequently as a leader, which makes each of these releases that have for a while been on ECM an event, a notable event for both musicians who follow Turner and critics who love his work. I'm really excited about this one as well. Now, there's 2 tracks currently available to listen to for this album: The Happiest Man on Earth and Super Sister. These are all in a no chord setting. So you've got bass, drums, and 2 horns, no piano, no guitar. And I think that this really benefits Turner's melodic strengths. He is one of the modern saxophonists who has kind of turned melody on its ear and made us rethink how melody maybe could be appealing, a little less jarring or jagged than something like bebop, but could still be rooted in really rooted in complex harmony. And one of the ways that he's accomplishing that here is by letting the linear nature of the music take over. I honestly think if there was a piano player and or a guitar player here, I mean, it would work, but it would lock the music into a different sound. And that's not what we're doing here. It is really interesting to hear the way that Turner navigates the space of the ensemble in this territory. Very informed and very intentional playing. The way he weaves lines around the bass, the way he plays off the rhythms of the drums, the way that he interacts with Jason Palmer to create harmonic implications. It's really, really powerful stuff. I also really like the rhythm section works a lot. It's intentional, very much in the moment. It's traditional, but it's not. There's uses of straight eighths. There's uses of implications of swing. Very modern, but you can tell that these folks could play very traditionally if they wanted to. really beautiful stuff. And I do have to say, I know that I already made the connection between Turner and Wayne Shorter, but this really reminds me of Wayne Shorter's late quartet in a big way. His group with John Patitucci and Brian Blade and Danilo Pérez. It was open. It was experimentational. It was exploratory, but it was free. It was free within structure. And I loved that about Wayne's group, and I hear that here. I do have to say, on the record, it's not quite as exploratory as what I heard from that Shorter group, but it's certainly going in that direction. And I have the feeling that live, this group would lean more in that direction and really open things up. I would love to see this group live. I've never seen Mark Turner live. That is one thing I would really, really like to do. Now, the last album, near and dear to my heart, comes from a bass legend, Miroslav Vitouš, and this is his upcoming album called Mountain Call. This is coming out on March 27th, and again, this one is from ECM. This one, I have to say, feels a little more in that ECM vibe that we've come to expect. It's got a large ensemble. I'll talk a little bit about kind of composition and orchestral ideas, leaning more in that third stream direction. Now, as I mentioned, Miroslav's a legend. We know him from his work with Chick Corea, Weather Report, the original Weather Report lineup, and beyond. And he has a heavy lineup right here. Of course, Miroslav's playing bass, Mikel Portal on saxophone, Jack DeJohnette, Esperanza Spalding, Bob Mincer, Gary Campbell, Gerald Cleaver. This is a heavy lineup right here. And it's a large ensemble. Really interesting. Now, I wonder, I haven't heard enough to say, but I wonder if these musicians are all playing at the same time or they come in and out. I'm not sure because I haven't heard it. But it has the potential to be a large ensemble project blending jazz improvisation with orchestral textures. Something that I know Miroslav has been very interested in for many years. And again, right along that ECM lineage right there. Now, anytime we get a album from Miroslav, I'm really interested. Like I mentioned before, I'm really familiar with his work in early Weather Report, his trio that he had with Chick Corea and Roy Haynes was just revelationary, really great. He also worked with people like Miles Davis and Herbie Hancock and whatnot. So anytime we've got a veteran like that making an album, it is something that I pay attention to, especially when that veteran is a bass player. Now, at this point, there's only one track available to hear, and that's a song called New Energy. I have to say it's kind of an interesting choice as a single release, but it might speak to what we are going to see in the bigger picture of this album. It's a very short song, under 2 minutes, and it also is only two musicians. It's a duet between Miroslav and Mikel Portal, which is quite conversational in nature. It really is based on melodies that go in a bunch of different directions. There are some established ideas, but there is a whole lot of just kind of free improvisation, a lot of communication between the two musicians, and just really kind of intriguing stuff that certainly is not meant to make the hot Spotify playlist. This is not something that's going to appeal to everyone, but jazz-wise, artistic-wise, it's fascinating. It really is. The bold experimentation is so inspiring, and it makes me excited for this one, beyond the fact that I'm a big fan of Miroslav's playing. Listening to this track, his command of thumb position, and his just fearlessness on the bass really just blows my mind. I'm curious about the greater album. The song list on the album is quite long, and it looks like there are a few suites or longer form works included just based off the titles. So there may be some deeper composition included in here. I don't know, but I can't wait to hear the full album. We have a lot of great stuff coming up, and it's going to be a good bit of music. March is shaping up to be a strong month for jazz releases right here. And I'd love, as you hear them, let me know what you think about them. And let me know if there's other albums coming out that I should be paying attention to. Put them down in the comments, please. Boy, it's been a powerful week. And when you step back and you look at all these stories together, they point to something interesting about where jazz and culture finds itself right now. Jazz at Lincoln Center, the idea behind Jazzcall for Freedom is that the values embedded in jazz, listening to elegant improvisation, might still have something to teach us about how people live together, might still have something meaningful to say about politics and culture. In Washington, D.C., the announcement of the lineup for the DC JazzFest reminds us that this music continues to bring people together in shared public spaces, even in the city where some of the country's deepest disagreements play out every day. And through new recordings, these ones from Adam O'Farrell, Mark Turner, and Miroslav Vitouš, musicians from 3 different generations, continuing that creative conversation that has kept this music evolving for more than a century. Take any 3 of these stories individually, they're just news from the jazz world. But put them together, and it's a hint at something bigger, because jazz has never been just a style of music. At its best, it's a way of interacting, a process where individuals bring their own voices, their own ideas, their own personalities, but the outcome depends on how well everything listens and responds to each other. Sometimes that process is messy, sometimes it's unpredictable, and sometimes it doesn't quite work. But when it does, the result is something none of the musicians could have created alone. And maybe that's one of the big lessons that jazz still offers, especially in moments like today, when listening can feel like a lost art in politics, in culture, and in our greater society. I'm Chip Boaz. Thanks for joining me this week on This Week in Jazz. Let me know what you thought of any of these stories down in the comments. I'll see you next week.